Cincinnati Union Terminal was born out of necessity. In the early 20th century, Cincinnati's rail system was a mess. 5 separate stations served 7 competing railroads, each scattered across the city and vulnerable to flooding from the Ohio River. The devastating flood of 1884 finally made clear what had been long obvious. The city needed a single, unified terminal. Then, in July of 1927, a breakthrough: the creation of the Cincinnati Union Terminal Company. Its mission was simple but ambitious: to consolidate the city's chaotic web of rails into one grand station. The chosen site, in the Mill Creek Valley neighborhood, offered both high ground and ideal rail connections. There, amid the convergence of steel and steam, Cincinnati would build not just a terminal, but a masterpiece of the golden age of American rail travel. Needless to say, it was a huge undertaking, in both size and importance. Construction began in 1928 with the regrading of the floodplain. 5.5 million cubic yards of landfill raised the site to 522 feet above sea level, giving the future station a platform above any ordinary river threat. The place was built to last generations. The architecture firm Fellheimer and Wagner was tapped to design the terminal itself, and they got right to it. What's interesting is that the original plan was to build the terminal in the Beaux-Arts style, with grand columns, vaulted ceilings, a more traditional and formal symmetry, and of course that signature stone ornamentation found on buildings of the style all over Ohio. In 1930, however, faced with rising costs and the onset of the Great Depression, the terminal company sought a leaner, more modern design that still conveyed that sense of civic grandeur. And thus, the most definitively Art Deco-styled train station terminal ever built in the US was born, right here in Cincinnati. When I first arrived at Cincinnati Union Terminal, a few unique things stood out to me. First, that perfect symmetry, an element of the Art Deco style that never goes unnoticed. And of course, the same goes for those Egyptian-style details woven into the building's facade too. This period of American Art Deco, the late 20s and early 30s, is characterized by the far-reaching wave of Egyptomania that influenced nearly all civic architecture design at the time. This near obsession with the writing and artwork of ancient Egypt was actually brought about by the discovery and excavation of King Tut's tomb from 1922 to 1925. As you can see, 2 sculptures have been carved into the 2 limestone buttresses on the front facade of the structure, weaving together hieroglyphic-style composition with a retro-futuristic design. The north buttress features an allegorical male personification of trade and industry, shown with the catechus, the staff of Mercury or Hermes, symbolizing negotiation and the exchange of goods, ideas, and messages. The south buttress depicts an allegorical female personification of transport. You can see her raising a winged globe, a classic Art Deco emblem symbolizing swift and efficient modern movement across the modern world. Both figures were sculpted by Maxfield Keck in 1931. The last detail I want to highlight on the outside is that awesome Deco-punk-style clock. Mounted at the center of the terminal's grand arch, it's an 18-foot wide masterpiece built by the Seth Thomas Clock Company in 1933. The face of the clock is made of 52 individual glass panels, alternating in amber and chrome, and glowing from within at night, while its neon-lined aluminum hands stretch over 6 feet across its face. And behind the clock, a master IBM time system, synchronizing every clock throughout the terminal. The chromium-style clock, along with the building's similar-styled marquee, juxtaposed against that beautiful limestone, present one of the most beautiful first impressions I've ever experienced on a train station visit. Passing through the entryway into the interior rotunda, I continued to just be fascinated with this place. Though you will notice that it does look and function a bit different than it did in the 1930s. You see, while the terminal opened to fanfare and a huge ceremony in 1933, it definitely faced headwinds in its early years. The Great Depression almost immediately dampened passenger traffic, and by 1939, reports were already writing it off as useless. Nonetheless, the terminal proved resilient, first as a safe zone during the Great Flood of 1937, and later during World War II. The war skyrocketed passenger traffic through the terminal, handling some 34,000 passengers a day at its height in the early 40s. Yet, just as before the war, after the war, the decline continued, and only got worse. The rise of air travel and increasing automobile ownership undercut almost all long-distance passenger rail. Oh, and local passenger rail too. In Cincinnati, the construction of I-75 stripped the terminal of its front yard to the city, and both literally and symbolically cut it off from downtown. By 1953, the terminal saw just 51 trains per day. By 1962, that number had dropped to just 24. And so, faced with rising maintenance costs and shrinking traffic, the terminal company began seeking alternate uses. In 1971, the newly formed Amtrak inherited Cincinnati's inner-city passenger service, but chose to abandon Union Terminal in October of the following year, moving service to a smaller station at River Road instead. The place was just too expensive for Amtrak to keep up with such little traffic. The last passenger train departed Cincinnati Union Terminal on October 28, 1972. Without its core rail business, the building's future looked bleak. The train concourse, platforms, and Western Rail Yard were sold to Southern Railway, which, in 1974, demolished most of the train concourse to accommodate its freight operations expansion. Now, I have to pause here because the destruction of the concourse and the platforms might be the biggest tragedy in the history of Cincinnati Union Terminal. When it stood, this beautiful concourse was one of the most extraordinary spaces in American rail architecture. 410 feet long and nearly 80 feet wide, elevated above 16 tracks and 8 island platforms. Its vast, segmental arch ceiling was painted with radiant shades from pale lemon to deep orange, and glowed under natural light streaming in through the steel-framed windows. 16 numbered gates lined the north and south walls, leading by stair and ramp to the platforms below. The western wall displayed Winwold Reese's monumental world map, flanked by 16 other murals celebrating Cincinnati's industries, created so specific as to depict actual local businesses, like Kahn's Meatpacking, one of several companies that made Cincinnati well known for meatpacking and distribution, giving the city the name Porkopolis. Luckily, all 16 of the seating area murals were carefully detached and moved, with some finding a new home at the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport, and others at the Duke Energy Convention Center. Unfortunately, the Deco Punk world map was simply too large to save. In August of '75, the city of Cincinnati purchased the terminal building and the surrounding land for $1 million and selected a developer to convert it into a shopping mall. You know, as you did in the 1970s. The retail concept opened in August 1980 with dozens of tenants and a department store anchor. But probably because this place was built within the city's industrial urban core instead of out in the suburbs, the mall failed relatively quickly, expedited by the early 80s recession. By 1984, most of the retail stalls had closed, and by 1985, even Loehmann's, the anchor store, had shuttered. Though it was at its lowest point in the late 80s when Cincinnati Union Terminal entered a new era of civic reinvention. In May of '86, Hamilton County voters approved a $33 million bond issue to convert the terminal into a multi-museum cultural complex, a decisive step forward that ultimately prevented the building's demolition. Restoration began in the late 80s, transforming roughly 200,000 square feet of underused rotunda, bus ramp, and movie theater space into a grand exhibition hall. The Cincinnati Museum Center formally opened on November 10, 1990, housing the Museum of Natural History, the Cincinnati History Museum, and later an OmniMax theater built in the footprint of the old concourse. And in time, Amtrak service returned to the terminal once again on July 29, 1991, with passenger trains using the terminal for the first time in almost 20 years, now offering their Cardinal service from Chicago to New York. Over the following decades, the complex expanded, adding the Duke Energy Children's Museum and the Nancy and David Wolf Holocaust and Humanities Center, and continuing to draw public investment through county-wide levies in 2004 and 2009. A major preservation milestone came in 2014, though, when voters passed a 5-year, quarter-cent sales tax raising about $228 million for a full structural rehabilitation. The project, completed in 2018, repaired roofs, facades, the clock, and even unearthed previously hidden murals, finally restoring the Art Deco landmark to its original brilliance. Though, unfortunately, the big fountain outside isn't up and running just yet. At least it wasn't when I was there. Of course, I do have to highlight my favorite museum of the bunch, the Cincinnati History Museum. You walk in and you're immediately greeted with this living miniature version of Cincinnati, what the museum calls Cincinnati in Motion, a 1:64 scale model of the city that recreates downtown in the 1940s, with working trains, streetcars, inclines, and a day-to-night lighting system. It's billed by the museum as the nation's largest full-motion urban layout of its kind, spanning roughly 4,000 square feet, with over 1,200 buildings, 18 running locomotives, 4 operational inclines, 500 plus vehicles, and about 2,000 figurines, alongside landmarks like the Roebling Bridge, City Hall, the old Crossley Field Ballpark, the Procter & Gamble factory complex, and even Cincinnati Union Terminal itself. And the miniature version was actually a great way for us to see how the terminal's staggered vehicle ramp system worked back in the early years. You see, the area that we're standing in right now actually used to be the train station's tunnel system. At its height, the terminal operated a network of ramps and service levels designed to keep passengers, baggage, and freight moving smoothly. Automobiles entered the drive-through baggage level on the north side of the building, where travelers could hand off their luggage directly to the station porters for check-in before parking, and where taxis and motor coaches could smoothly drop passengers off right in front of the train platforms before leaving the terminal. The separation of people and baggage flow, along with the dedicated truck ramps and mail tunnels, kept congestion to a minimum and allowed the terminal to handle massive wartime crowds with remarkable efficiency. One of the tunnels was actually supposed to be used for streetcar service, but that never panned out. No streetcar has ever made its way through Cincinnati Union Terminal. Well, none except for this one. Meet Cincinnati Street Railway Car 2435, built in 1923 by the Cincinnati Car Company. From 1923 until 1951, it rolled along the streets of Cincinnati carrying everyday riders to work, school, and ball games for just 2 nickels a ticket. When the city's streetcar system shut down in the early 50s, most of its fleet was scrapped, but 2435's fate took a different turn when, in 1954, a couple from Falmouth, Kentucky bought the retired car and used it as a souvenir stand in front of their house on US Highway 27. For more than 30 years, travelers could stop by, pick up trinkets, and step inside an authentic Cincinnati streetcar parked right in front of the couple's farmhouse. In 1988, the couple donated the car to the Cincinnati Transit Historical Association, and Car 2435 was lovingly restored and is now preserved on display inside the Cincinnati History Museum. You can go inside it and sit on the old seats, admire the replica ads and lighting, and read the old Clifton Ludlow destination roll sign, though it's not quite clear if 2435 ever actually operated on that line specifically. But just by taking a peek at the city's streetcar network circa 1944, well, yeah, it's more than likely. The streetcars, of course, went everywhere in the city, and although there's only one modern line left today, so much of that old streetcar urban fabric is still around, and for me, it's what made exploring the urban core so much fun in the present day. The city's timeline exhibit adjacent to the streetcar is also fantastic, taking you through Cincinnati's transportation history with the rise of the streetcar era, the subsequent rise of the automobile, the decline of rail transit in general, why America's culture shifted, or was forced to shift, the consequences of all of it, and the overall role that each new mode of transportation had in reshaping and rezoning the city. It essentially retells the story of Cincinnati's transportation and urban planning history. It's a must-visit if you're in the city for the first time. The History Museum is located inside Union Terminal's South Wing, but the North Wing is pretty special too. I didn't spend too much time here because, I don't know, I like trains and cities more than dinosaurs, but this is where you can find the Cincinnati Museum of Natural History and Science. Another great spot to check out if you're into that sort of thing. Urban fossils, ancient fossils, all inside an architectural fossil. Born in the 1930s, dug up in the 1990s, and on display for the world to see as of the 2020s. One area of the terminal I wasn't able to access was the actual Amtrak passenger waiting area itself, as I did need a separate ticket for that. Now, I would have bought the cheapest ticket to the next train out. The only problem was Amtrak only operates service 3 times a week at around 2 a.m. local time, for over $100 one way. Yeah, that's just a little too steep for me right now. Maybe this channel will grow big enough for me to do that one day, but I can tell you about it though, really quickly. The passenger waiting area occupies what was the former Gentleman's Lounge, a side room off of the Great Rotunda near where the former concourse entrance was. It was and still is a fairly compact space, with just enough room for today's modern midnight passenger rail crowds, and a ticket counter. And it was at precisely this time when one of the docents of the Cincinnati History Museum asked what I was doing, and once I told her, She took me on a mission all over the terminal in record speed. First, to the beautiful Art Deco private dining room in between the women's lounge and the lunchroom. That room was really nice and beautiful, and I'm just rambling to show you enough footage of it. But then she took me over to the lunchroom itself, where she actually told me that these bolts left embedded in the floor would have been where the original cashier's counters used to be, outlined by these leftover curved patterns. That room was also really cool and awesome, and you should definitely check it out too. Then it was over to the original 118-seat movie theater, playing some old movies and shows from the era. Then I was shown back across the rotunda to this Deco punk relic, originally housing the Rockwood Tea Room, decorated entirely in these really funky-looking Rockwood pottery tiles, relics of the early 20th century American arts and crafts movement, currently a Grater's ice cream parlor. I spent literally like 3 hours here and still don't think I was able to see nearly everything. But if you do want to see absolutely everything, I recommend taking a visit for yourself, particularly during their public tours on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays before 2 p.m. I arrived on Sunday after 2 p.m., so I didn't get to see the tour, and I missed out on a bunch of stuff, but you should definitely check it out for yourself. Whether exploring the station's larger, more iconic elements, or the smaller, preciously preserved details, Cincinnati Union Terminal is certified to be a good time. And like I said, this was only my first impression. I then spent several days exploring the ins and outs of the city itself, and it was wonderful. Expect a full dedicated Cincinnati video in the near future, where I'll be exploring everything from the urban core to the streetcar suburbs, and even some incredible industrial adaptive reuse. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future uploads. I'll see you next week, right here, from 4th place.